Chapter 27. Gabe had done an amazing job of distracting her last night. Imogen felt more relaxed than the situation warranted. All the tension that had built between them over the last months had exploded in hours of tangled bliss, worshipping each other and whispering promises in the dark. The woods were silent in the aftermath of the storm. Imogen listened to the crunching of snow as Gabe performed the morning horse chores. He'd gotten up in the middle of the night to check on them, donning his winter gear, and promising her he'd be back soon. He kept good on his word, greeting her with a kiss and continuing to explore each other. Now that the floodgates are opened, their connection had only intensified. She couldn't get enough of him. She snuggled into the warm blanket he'd found in a cupboard before going outside, missing him, replaying the night in her head. They should get away together more often. A single-minded Gabe was something she needed more of in her life. He'd insisted that she stay where she was while he took care of the horses and brought in more firewood to dry for the next person who used the shack. Imogen knew she'd have to get up soon. They were starting early in the hopes of finding fortune today. It was so warm in her cocoon, though, but the sun was rising, creating a dim light to see by outside and putting an end to their interlude. When the door opened, bringing with it a gust of wind and below freezing temperatures, Imogen was already up and donning her layers. Gabe knocked off his boots, then walked the few feet over to her. "Good morning, beautiful. Did you sleep at all?" Imogen smirked. "I don't remember sleeping much, but it was worth it." Oh, had it been. She'd need a nap later, but she wouldn't have traded last night for anything. "I'm glad to hear you say that. I probably should have let you sleep more. Today could be a long one." He traced the darkened circles under her eyes with a finger before kissing her again. "Are you up to another day?" Imogen was determined. "I feel surprisingly energized, actually. We're going to find him this morning. I know it." Gabe loved her positivity, but he knew the chances of them finding the horse alive and well were slim. When he'd escaped from Smithfield show stables previously, he'd kept within 5 miles, usually ending up near his home or Joe's farm next door. They'd traveled about that distance, tracking him, before they'd had to stop. The good news was the weather would have slowed him down. He likely would have panicked and galloped for a couple of minutes before stopping to walk or graze. That was in their favor, and meant he'd probably be closer to home. "I'm thinking we should circle back to where we last saw his tracks. They'll be gone now, blown away or under a foot of snow, but we might see something new. This hunting cabin is 6 miles from my house. I'm thinking based on past behavior, we may have overshot him." Imogen frowned. "Do you think we should head back?" Gabe nodded. "My gut is telling me he'll be closer to home. He could have even backtracked. I have a satellite phone. I'm going to check on Joe quickly, set the cabin to rights, and then we'll get moving. Can you tack up the horses?" "Of course I can. Let Aunt Jo know we're okay. I know she's worried about us out in this." Imogen wasn't worried about her aunt. She'd weathered many winter storms and was able to rough it with the best of them without electricity for up to 2 weeks if needed. They'd prepped the cabin before winter, checking batteries and making sure everything was replaced from the previous year. Of course. Gabe leaned down to kiss Imogen again, unwilling to keep his hands off her. He couldn't wait to take her on a vacation, somewhere where they could focus solely on each other for a few days. She leaned into the kiss, needing the contact just as much, and wrapped her arms around him. He acquiesced to her silent request, and he lifted her so she was closer to his height, leaning her into the wall as she wrapped her legs around him for support as he deepened their kiss. Imogen never wanted this feeling to end. The only thing that would make life better would be getting her horse home safely. Reluctantly releasing him, she leaned back and looked up at him. "Promise me that no matter what happens, we'll get through this together as a team." "I wouldn't have it any other way." Imogen had just finished tacking up the horses when Gabe came outside. "That was quick. How's Aunt Jo?" The weather was infinitely better than the previous day, but she rubbed her hands to warm them. Her thick gloves were not suitable for tying a latigo nicely, so she'd put them in the pocket of her coveralls. "She's good. Said they lost power, but the animals are fed and watered. Joe went over to oversee everything after we left. The sheriff took Anita's statement, the county medical examiner took the body, and she hasn't seen Fortune. Darn, I was hoping he'd end up with the goats. Arnie misses him. She'd lost count of how many times she would find them together, the goat on Fortune's back, bleeding happily, while Fortune just grazed without a care. They were an odd pair, but somehow they worked. I've replaced the firewood and cleaned up inside. I'll buy some food to replace what we used when the weather clears. Thank goodness you knew of this place. I'd hate to think of what would have happened. One of the benefits of growing up here, I guess. Gabe shrugged. We would have made it work. I have emergency supplies, but it was infinitely better to sleep there than outside. Imogen blushed. What had been a harrowing experience had turned into the best night of her life. Gabe grinned at the color in her cheeks and nipped in for a soft kiss before leading Rowdy out of the stall and into the cold morning air. You're turning into an adventurer yet, Jersey. I wasn't sure you had it in you, but you surprised me at every turn. She really had. From the moment they had met, she constantly exceeded his expectations. His redhead was tough. It would have been normal for her to fall apart, to lament or whine about the situation. Instead, she'd put her personal feelings about him aside and did what was needed to be done for her horse. Rather than make the search harder on him, and him wish he'd gone alone, she'd been a valuable set of eyes. It was nice to have her as a partner. Imogen followed him out, not having a clue what he was thinking. Gabe wordlessly offered her a leg up, which she accepted. When she was astride her horse, she looked down at where he'd left his hand on her thigh, absently running his thumb up and down in a caress. She winked. Come on, cowboy, let's go find us a horse. With one last squeeze of her thigh, he nodded before turning to his own horse and effortlessly swung up into the saddle. Imogen watched, always impressed at his horsemanship and gentleness. With a slight squeeze of their legs, they left the cozy little shack that Imogen would always remember with fondness. This tiny room in the middle of the woods was where they cemented their future. She believed that with her heart and her head. For the first time, the two sides of her were in complete agreement. Something had shifted between them last night. Not just physical, although that had been nothing short of life-changing, but it was like an emotional wall had come down, bringing them closer together. Gabe had opened up to her, and while she knew there was a lot more to learn about his time in the military and the PTSD he struggled with, Imogen would do some research into how loved ones could support. She wanted to be the best partner she could be for him. She felt like as long as they had each other to lean on, they could accomplish anything.